Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Krish Kandiah, and I'm delighted to invite you to our special seminar as we think about supporting Ukrainian children in the UK. I'm the founder of a little charity called Sanctuary Foundation, and we exist to try and support refugees coming from Ukraine. At this time, that's our high priority. We have a huge passion for Afghan refugees, South Sudanese, Eritrean as well. But at the moment, our focus is mobilizing this incredible outpouring of support and welcome to the UK for Ukrainians. So we're delighted that you're able to join us. Over 1,000 people have logged in and registered to be at this event, and we're just delighted that you're giving us this time at a busy time for all of us in the middle of the working day. I hope that you are going to get some really helpful insights today. We've got a clinical a community paediatrician, we've got a trauma expert, we've got an education expert and a safeguarding expert. We are really looking forward to hearing from each one of them as we go through. You're also going to have the opportunity to ask questions. We want you to use the chat function in YouTube and let us know what you're thinking. As all of our speakers are giving their time for free, so please cheer them on. Tell us when they've said something great and let them know that you're appreciative of what they're doing. But also, if you have a question, raise it, and I'll do my best to kind of catch those questions and be able to raise it to our guests as they come through. Now, I've had the privilege of meeting many refugee children, some of them in camps like in Lebanon. Those were children fleeing the conflict in Syria. I've also had the chance to work with Kosovan refugee children back in the 1990s. And so we're building a great big body of experience and wisdom to know how best to help children that are fleeing the trauma and distress of a war zone. And many of us have seen those terrible pictures on the news of children sheltering underground, fearful for bombs dropping on them. So you can imagine there's a whole bunch of needs that these children are facing. And I want you just to kind of get a bit of a picture of the kind of 7 areas that you might need to consider. We're going to be focusing a little bit on the medical and the educational and the traumatic needs, but there are other needs too. And just got a little slide to kind of help you think about that. The first area that we need to think about is the physical well-being of the children. And we want to encourage children to look after their bodies, to eat well, sleep well, rest and take prescribed medications. And as volunteers and hosts, we have some responsibility for that. But obviously, we want to support parents who are the primary caregivers. So we must make sure that we understand our role as relates to those the parents and designated adults in a child's life. But still, we can be doing all that we can to encourage their physical well-being. We also want to encourage a child's emotional well-being. That's encouraging children to recognize their own emotions and those of others, and to manage and regulate those emotions in everyday life and difficult circumstances. So again, this is not about us telling children what to do, but helping a child come to the point when they're able to regulate their own emotions. We're interested in a child's mental well-being, encouraging children to build positive thought patterns and build resilience to negative, stressful, depressive, fearful and anxious thought patterns. And that's, again, something that you don't need to have professional excellence and expertise in order to be able to do, but they have a role, but we can do our best to encourage these things. Okay, spiritual well-being. This is how a child kind of views themselves. Some of us here come from a faith background, some of us don't. But we recognise that a child needs to discover a sense of purpose, transcendence and identity, and develop their own beliefs and values and attitudes. And so we want to be careful that we nurture and support the child as they want to go forward in their own spiritual development. We're interested in a child's social well-being, encouraging children to form meaningful relationships with others, manage social situations, and have a network of friendships. Again, we have a role as hosts and volunteers and teachers and supporters, but the child has a role and their parent has a role too. But we need to know that we're on the same team with that child. We want to care for a child's educational well-being, encouraging children to spend their time productively, acquire knowledge, develop skills, understanding, empathy, and the ability to problem solve and find ways to contribute to society. And again, we're going to hear a lot about education, and that means formal school education. But there's stuff that we can be doing as friends and supporters and hosts to encourage children in their own educational journey. And finally, we want to think about family well-being, encouraging children to be rooted in safe, permanent and supportive family environments. What you're going to be hearing today is going to look at some of those different areas, but we're not going to be able to cover all of them. And that's why the Sanctuary Foundation has set up a special course to help you as hosts and friends and volunteers to support children and their wider family. And you're going to be hearing details later on about how you can enroll for free on the Sanctuary Foundation course. Anyway, I am delighted that we have an incredible lineup of speakers. And the first one is a good friend of mine. It's Dr. Max Davey. He is a consultant pediatric community pediatrician. He has a wealth of experience. He has a lovely family. I've had the privilege of knowing Max for, oh man, nearly a decade, I think it is. He's a big fan of Radiohead, which I think was how we first connected, because I dared to show a Radiohead clip in one of my talks. But Max, you're going to help us understand the kind of whole range of different medical and practical aspects of a child's well-being as they come to the UK from somewhere like Ukraine. So over to you, Max.
Thank you very much, Krish. I also claim to be Krish's most dedicated heckler, so that's another distinction that I have. So I am a paediatrician. I work in South London. I had some involvement with some of the local families who've come over from Ukraine, and that sort of informs my kind of very brief remarks today. I'm the Health Improvement Officer at the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, and we've been working on a little bit of guidance jointly with the NSPCC. So there'll be some messages that come from that, and that will be public. That will come out next week and be publicly available at that point. So it's a slight sneaky peek. I suppose the four things I wanted to say this morning to you were just some principles of how to deal with people who are arriving in a new, unfamiliar place. And actually, kind of ironically, what the first thing I would say is to try and think about giving space and having space yourself. This is a really intense experience for everybody involved, and so having that space and those boundaries for the people coming from Ukraine to process the experience, to get used to things, and to ease themselves into kind of British society at their own pace is really important. But it's also important to have space yourselves. There's a lot of enthusiasm, and it's wonderful, and the kind of wanting to give and show what a hospitable country we are. But we just need to think: can it be overwhelming? Can it be too much? And these are, people with their own decisions and they need their own autonomy. It's just something I've noticed in some of the dynamics of things when people come over, that I think giving space is really important, so that they feel like they have their privacy and their own decision making as soon as possible. The second thing is encouraging communication. Now, there are some practical things, of course, that you may have come across about downloading translation apps onto your phone, learning Ukrainian yourself, and of course, a lot of the people who come over either have or are quickly learning English. But it's not just language, it's about listening. It's about, again, having the time to listen to people, give them time not to kind of bombard them with questions on day one, but to give them time to tell you about their experiences and how everything's been and what their life was like, the kind of the joy and the things that they used to enjoy. So that kind of communication, which does take patience, not just in terms of technical skills, but also just having the time to sit with people and just wait for them to talk, is really important. And I'm sure my colleagues will talk about that in a minute. And then there's plugging in, another slightly practical thing, which is plugging into services. It is really important to know that the kids who come over will have a right to education, and it isn't the benefit of school is not just educational. As long as schools, and again we have speakers talking about that, as long as schools can support the children adequately, there's huge social benefits and ultimately mental health benefits to that rhythm of school, that socialization of school, and all of the things that come with attending and making transition into a school. The other thing, of course, is healthcare. A lot of people are coming, so a proportion of them will have existing healthcare needs, and they have the right to NHS care. So you just need to facilitate those registrations, get them plugged into, if they're on medication already, get an equivalent medication going. That sort of thing is quite practical, and there's lots of guidance out there. But it is important that you help them with that. Nothing nothing gives you, nothing impresses on you more how complex our system is than somebody trying to access it for the first time. It really is astonishingly complex. So navigating that can be really helpful for them. And then obviously this is all things that, you know, assuming things go smoothly. A lot of today might be about when things don't go so smoothly, and maybe the children are showing some kind of distress or behavioral unusual behaviors. And I think the only thing I would say about that is don't assume that you know what's going on. Don't assume that, oh, it's due to this, you know, just because they're, you know, because they're refugees, there must be something that's happened at that point. It may be something that's happening now. It may be something that they're not telling you, or they haven't even told their parents. It may, and we'll talk about safeguarding later, be something wrong within the dynamic of the family who've come over, and it may be probably a very small proportion of cases that some kind of safeguarding action may need to be taken if you're really worried. And the key is just to keep an open mind, talk to anyone locally you know who might sort of have experience, and also keep the communication going with the family themselves. There's lots of practical advice that you'll be given later in this session, but those are the sort of 4 things that I would say. So give people space and get space for yourself, encourage communication, plug them into services, and if things go wrong, don't assume you know what's going on. Keep an open mind and keep going, keep talking to everyone around the family. Back to you, Krish.
Brilliant, Max. So helpful. Thank you very much. And thanks for bringing frontline experience of caring for vulnerable children for many years. We're going to be hearing from Max a little bit later on as well, when we're going to look at some case studies, real life case studies of children that have arrived here and have presented with a whole bunch of challenges. And many of our hosts just really struggling to know how best to help. It looks like from our chat, the majority of people here are hosts. So I just want to say well done. Thank you very much for being part of this incredible social movement to welcome people from Ukraine. What you're doing is amazing, and thank you to all the volunteers that are here as well. We know not all of us can host, but we all have a part to play, and hats off to teachers, as if you didn't have enough challenges in recent years with COVID, now stepping up to help Ukrainian children. You guys are brilliant, and I wish we had a thank you to thank you to teachers poster like we have. Thank you, NHS. So really, really great to have you all here. And interesting that the majority of you so far haven't had experience working with vulnerable children or refugees before. So we're going to make sure that where we're pitching this is going to give you some of the basics that you need to get started. But we're going to give you links where you can find out even more detailed information and dig a bit deeper. And I've put it in the chat already. The Sanctuary course is probably your first step, and it's going to really help you. So you've heard from Max. There you go, consultant, community paediatrician. You're now going to hear from Wendy. And Wendy's joining us all the way from the United States. She normally lives in Oxfordshire, so great that you're able to join us as well. And Wendy has experience just as a trauma counsellor. Wendy, look, we are not counsellors, we're just ordinary people that are looking after children. Many of us have had no experience before. What are some of the things that we can do to support children that might be experiencing trauma?
That's great. Thank you very much, Krish. I'm going to focus on 4 points that are directed towards the children, but if you want more information, I've done a 3-part series on understanding trauma that you can go to, and it'll give you more information as a host or even as a teacher or volunteer that might help you with working with this a little bit more in detail. But for today, I'm going to stick to 4 points. The first point would be that you should expect that all of these children have experienced some sort of trauma. They're all coming to you from leaving a home situation, whatever it took them to get where they are right now, and whatever it is they've witnessed or seen in their home country, as well as anyone they've been separated from because of what is going on. So expect that all the students will have had some experience of trauma and are in what we call a post-traumatic state. They will not all have a disorder, but they're dealing with a physical state of trauma. That would be the first thing I'd want you to understand. The second thing is that trauma is a physical as well as mental state. And most of you are familiar with the fight, flight, freeze reflex. And these students will be in various aspects of that at various different times. So you may find them quite quiet in response, maybe detached, not paying attention, kind of looking like they're in their own world, or disassociated in general. They may be very quick to get angry, or they may, have trouble engaging. They may be almost hiding. You'll see some signs of things like where they may do stuff, lots of this, or pulling on their shirts and things like that, where they're actually almost trying to hide in an open state. And so you'll see some of that. And again, if you go to the video series, you'll see a lot more information of that in detail. The best thing to do with someone who is in a traumatized state is you want to stay calm. You want to keep your voice quiet, even if you've been triggered yourself. A gentle voice. You want to not go into their space. You want to give them that space. As Max said, safe spaces are really important. You want things that are going to be familiar to them, routine. Again, Max talked about don't expect certain things, but don't overwhelm them. Minimize surprises. Things that we think might be fun for them may not be fun for them at all. So ask them, would you like to participate in, would you like to, and then come up with maybe some alternatives for them if they're not comfortable with something. Just playing in the playground might be a little overwhelming, or it might be exactly what they need. So ask them what they want. And then third, I'd say really focusing on the present. You want to, anything that they're talking about from their experience back home, you want to use words like remembering, I'm remembering, or that loud noise made me feel just like when something else happened. You want to do your best to have them focused on the present and putting the past in the past. That's one of the best things that you can do to help them through this trauma response. Some of the things that you can do to ground them is ask about what's going on right now. Call attention to things in the room. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? Things of that nature. What color shoes are you wearing? What color eyes do I have? Anything of that nature that will bring them into the place that they're in is going to be really helpful. And then an anchor. If you have a particular student or child that is very easily triggered, you may want to ask them, what's a happy memory? What's something that makes them feel good, that gives them a warm feeling in their chest, or a place where they were comfortable and confident. And when they seem agitated, ask them to tell you about that place. It could be a cartoon they like to watch. It could be a holiday they went on with their family. It could be just something their mother or grandmother cooks that smells really nice. Anything like that you can help them get the feelings in their body back to something that's pleasant versus unpleasant. And then lastly, protecting them from re-traumatization. So being really aware of sensitive topics. Talking too much about what has just happened is going to reactivate them. So you want to, like, if you're talking about home country, what kind of games did you play? What did your house look like? Things that are not going to be about what just happened, but things that are more solid, that they can become about versus being re-triggered about. And that's what I've got to say on that. And I'll pass back to Krish.
Oh, amazing, Wendy. Thank you for so many really practical things. We're going to be looking at some case studies in a little while. You'll be able to hear how this works out in practice. Fascinating to see that most of the hosts that are here, I think 78% so far, don't have other children in the house, but 22% of you do. I'm interested in the impact that's having on your own kids. I know as a foster parent, there are things that we needed to do with our own children to make sure that they were looked after, they weren't part of their re-traumatization, or they weren't traumatized themselves by other children coming in. So we'll get to talk about that in a little while too. But Wendy, great job. And I know there was so much condensed information that many of you will be able to watch this again later at your own pace, because you probably have lots of notes you'll want to make. Now, education is an absolutely vital part of a child really overcoming some of the stuff that they faced in the transition to a new country, and really reasserting themselves, rebuilding their lives over here. So it's fantastic. Our long-term partner, Refugee Education UK, are here, and Emily Bowerman is going to talk about some of the issues around how to help a child from Ukraine engage in the education system.
Great, Krish, thank you so much, and thank you for having me here, everyone. So at Refugee Education UK, we're all about enabling children and young people who've had to flee their homes because of war or other forms of persecution to get into school and thrive in school and progress through their education. And today I thought in my section, I just wanted to touch briefly on what trauma might look like in the school context, and to highlight where you might be able to go for further help and support. So I think Wendy's really helpfully given us a description of what trauma might look like in children's lives, and that physical state of experiencing trauma, the fight or flight mechanism, which might manifest itself in extreme behaviour at school. It might lead to children withdrawing. Children might find it harder to concentrate within school. Even like struggling to sleep could have an impact on their ability to concentrate in class. And sometimes trauma leads to visible distress. And all of these things have an impact on a child's ability to engage socially in their class, but also to learn. There's a lot of evidence of the impact of trauma on children's ability to learn. And not all of these signs will apply to every child, but I think it's really worth being mindful of all the things that Wendy and Max have said, so that as you see a child's behaviour in school, you're thinking about what they might have experienced, which might be leading to them demonstrating that type of behaviour. So that's what trauma could look like. What can schools do? How can you respond? As Wendy said, there are lots of things that we can do as individuals. So as individual teachers or staff members, engaging with an individual child, creating safe spaces, being calm, giving people simple tasks or actions to do. Wendy talked as well about being aware of sensitive topics, and I think it's particularly worth highlighting that in the education context, because a lot of the things we draw on to build relationships with new people is to talk about things like home or family, and just remembering that for a child who is fleeing war, some of those things could be really triggering and not as comforting as we might expect them to be. So in some training that Refugee Education UK runs, we go into this in a lot more depth, and we help you think through about the principles you could draw on when you're supporting children who've experienced trauma, including building trust and listening and learning, remembering the trauma that people have experienced and looking beyond the visible behaviour they might be manifesting in the classroom. And also recognising the value of the child's presence in your classroom and the opportunity for all children, whether they are newly arrived refugees or not, to learn with and from each other. They have a lot to offer us and our communities as well. In our training, we also look in more detail at what schools can do as a whole to be welcoming and inclusive. There are loads of great ideas out there: peer support initiatives, buddy schemes, things you can do to help children adjust and feel safe in their new environment, and pastoral care and wellbeing support. And rather than focusing on those details now, I thought I'd just leave you with a couple of suggestions as to where you could go to find out more information about those things. There really is such a breadth and depth of information out there, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So a couple of organisations, firstly Refugee Education UK that I'm part of, we offer a wide range of training, support, guidance. We produced education welcome packs following the Afghan crisis last summer, and are translating those into Ukrainian at the moment. And do look us up if that helps you. But also Schools of Sanctuary is a great organisation which supports schools to create cultures of welcome where children of all backgrounds can thrive. And I think the final thing I'd say before handing back to Krish is how Max talked at the start about creating a space for yourself, remembering that vicarious trauma is a real thing, that as we take on board other people's experiences, it can impact us as well. So whether you're a teacher or another member of a school staff, prioritise the things that support your own well-being as well, whether that's chatting with a friend, going for a run, having a good coffee, or talking to someone professional if you need it. I'll leave it there for now and hand back to Krish.
Thank you, Emily. So helpful and really good advice about you as a host, or even if you're a parent watching here, making sure that there's enough time for you to get the help and support that you need. On the Sanctuary course, there's a whole section about keeping the family and the children safe, but also thinking about your own well-being as well. We use the metaphor that when a plane is, in trouble and the oxygen masks fall down, they often say that you should put your own mask on first before you care for the needs of another person. That's because if you pass out, you can't be any use to anybody. So that's a really, really helpful bit of advice. Just a quick poll that we had. I think 62 of you have voted so far. I asked you, have the children that you know that have arrived in the UK been able to find school places? And the good news is 78% have. And again, that's testimony to the fabulous work that our teachers are doing, making space, making sure that refugee children from Ukraine are getting the help that they need. Still 23%, 22% is changing, haven't yet. And I'm interested to hear more about what the issues are that you have been facing, because I'd love to be able to speak up to government. That's one of the opportunities that we have here at Sanctuary. Now, Justin Humphreys from 31A makes his apologies. He can't be here, but I met with Justin in my house and we recorded a little interview with him. This interview comes from the Sanctuary course. It gives you a little bit of a taste of some of the material that's there. We have a whole huge interest in the area of safeguarding, where Justin's going to share a little bit about from his insights about that.
Safeguarding is a range of measures that we undertake to help keep people safer. So we often think that it's all about what happens when it goes horribly wrong, and it is that to a degree. But it's also about the things that we do to prevent people from getting harmed. So the things that we do to create safer environments. So it's both preventative and responsive. Refugees are particularly in need of safeguarding because of their experience, where they've come from. The fact that they've arrived in this country or wherever it is not native to them, and have experienced trauma, have lost largely everything that they own. The power imbalance, therefore, that we see often is exacerbated by their circumstances. Even loss, we all know about our experiences of loss and how we respond to loss, how that in itself can make us more vulnerable than we otherwise might be. So there's a whole range of reasons why we need to be particularly attentive to refugees. And the Charity Commission tells us particularly that newly arrived families and refugees should be considered as vulnerable. So it's important that we look at them with respect and with compassion. So at the heart of all harm and abuse caused by one individual to another, there is a power imbalance at the heart of it. It's a misuse and an abuse of power. So where we see that power dynamic or that differential being greater, there is a greater chance for harm to be caused in the process. So we see it in so many settings, don't we, that power is misused, sometimes unwittingly, sometimes intentionally. We can't afford to be looking at the motivation and the intention. We look at the impact and the harm that is caused by people who will exert their power over others. Refugees who are entering this country, because by virtue of the fact they have entered this country with practically nothing to their name, the power differential that may exist between them and others is exacerbated. So they are rendered, in a sense, more vulnerable to abuses of power because of their own situation. So what we need to be particularly mindful of is that we are not exploiting the lack of power that refugees enter this country with. What we should be about is empowering them to have agency for themselves, encouraging them to connect with their communities in a safe way. What we would always say is act with respectful uncertainty or compassionate curiosity. And that's not to say that we are looking under every stone around every corner, looking for the harm that is being caused to people. That's not always helpful, but being alert to the possibility, asking appropriate questions, being sensitive, and then making sure that we take that information to the appropriate people rather than sit on it and neither about it is the way to go. So compassionate curiosity is what I'd encourage us all to here. So we'd encourage people, deal with things early. Don't be afraid to share legitimate concern with the right people. it's important that we're really clear about who we tell if we are concerned that somebody has come to harm or abuse. So most settings and organisations should have what we would call a designated safeguarding lead, somebody who has been trained, somebody who's been put in a position to take a responsible lead. Well, if anyone's not sure of where they need to take a concern to, I would recommend that firstly they could go to their local authority, speak to the duty social work teams there. Many local authorities will have what they call MASH systems, so multi-agency safeguarding hubs, if you make contact with them. Sometimes the police will have responsibilities as well. If there's concern that criminality has taken place, then they have responsibility. And aside from all of that, if you don't have a designated person that you know of in your particular setting, let's say you're supporting somebody at home, then the 318 helpline is available to anybody to call. So 0303 003 1111. Anybody can call that. Friendly professional team will just talk you through the situation that you've got and give you best advice about where to go next. So we've been talking about safeguarding, and as we started at the beginning saying, for many people that feels like a bit of a bad news situation. Can I just encourage you? Because I think what people are doing up and down the country, what you guys are doing, is about preventative measures. It's about thinking creatively and constructively about how we create safer environments for people who may be vulnerable.
Brilliant. Thank you, Justin. And you can see more from Justin and other safeguarding, trauma and anti-trafficking experts on the Sanctuary course. This imbalance of power is quite an important thing. You might not feel particularly powerful, but as a host or a teacher or even a volunteer to someone coming from another country who feels vulnerable, there is always going to be this imbalance of power. So finding ways that we can give agency and empowerment to those people we're seeking to serve is really important, and a lot of that comes with choice. So this idea of that Wendy was sharing about inviting, asking, being curious, all of these things are ways in which we empower people. And from what I've heard, and I'd love to pick the brains of my team in a minute, that giving choice and autonomy is a really powerful anti-trauma gift that we can give back to people. So great, some wonderful questions. Interesting that many of you in different contexts, I don't think particularly for the Homes for Ukraine scheme, you've had some safeguarding training. That could be in a youth work setting, a kind of Sunday school setting, a school setting. You've had some of that. Great to hear. I'd love you to tell me the kind of context in which you've received your safeguarding training, because that's really encouraging. A lot of people are nervous that many of the hosts haven't had that. So great to hear that you have. Now, we're going to try some real life case studies. I'm going to invite my friends to come and join me on the screen. This is like a group therapy session, and these case studies are based on real life events. And we'll just kind of chuck some of them around, and whoever wants to go first, feel free. I'm thinking, Emily, you might want to go first on this one. A 13-year-old Ukrainian girl has been in the UK for 2 weeks, and she's being schooled online from Ukraine. That's great, because you get some consistent teaching. But how can we, or the host or volunteers, help to integrate this child into the UK? I mean, is that a good thing, bad thing? What might you suggest as someone who has expertise in education?
Yeah, I think I agree that it's great that for now she's still being able to connect with education in some way. But I think, as Max said earlier, school is about so much more than just education. There's the social benefits, the community, the friendships, learning, and just the safety that people need. And there's also within refugee education, particularly, there's a lot of evidence that the sooner that that refugee children can integrate into local schools, the better. So I suppose we would encourage the host family to try and connect her with local schools. I mentioned in my presentation that we have produced an education welcome pack, and that's an introduction particularly aimed at parents of the British school system and how to go about getting into school. We're in the process of translating it into Ukrainian, but I would suggest that as a good starting point for how to get her involved in a school as well.
Brilliant. We'll come to Max and Wendy for their observations. Another way we can empower the families coming is to let them choose their own school. So we might want to go ahead and kind of make sure that we sign up the family before they arrive. I guess if there's only one school in your village or something, that's probably the only way forward. But if it is possible to maybe set up some visits so that then the family are making the decisions involving the child where that's possible too, that's probably really helpful. But Max and Wendy, any observations about, you know, how important is it for continuity of education with this online platform versus integration?
I'll speak from a trauma perspective. It may take a while for someone who is in a physical state of post-trauma to settle enough to engage. And so being online, familiar language, familiar teacher, familiar thing may actually be quite helpful for particular children. And slow integration is okay. It's okay if most of their interactions are with people back home or friends that are in other cities or even other countries. Those people get them, they understand, it's familiar, it's safe, you know, and that's what we're wanting to do from a trauma perspective, is help stabilize the body to get to a place where they can actually even think about what's just happened to them. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. And then I'd slowly introduce maybe some contact, one-to-one play date or something like that, of somebody who who is sensitive and aware of what's going on, and just take it slow.
That's really helpful, Wendy. And again, one of the challenges is we're hosts and teachers and volunteers mainly. The primary decision making is with the parent, and so we want to empower the parent to make those choices, but we might want to encourage it or kind of give them some options. But it's a tough balance, isn't it? Because we might have a view and a parent might have another view, and that's part of the excitement of cross-cultural, you know, hospitality, that we find a way to work with and allow the parents to make those decisions. Max, any comment from you on this one?
Yeah, I mean, just to say that there's, you know, we've just discovered in the pandemic that there's actually sort of a limited amount of online education that anyone can stomach in any particular one day. So, you know, there's probably enough time in the day for this person to have some online education from Ukraine, and also spend a couple of hours in school in the UK. There is quite a lively discussion in the comments about getting a child with special needs into school. I don't know if we want to address that now or later.
Yeah, that's a good question. And one of the comments that came up, Emily, was around what rights do new children to a new area have? If a local school says it's full, is that the end of the story, or what else can parents do? So do you want to pick up on this, helping a child with special needs to get into the right school, and then just school placements in general?
Yeah, it is really challenging. We have an advice service, and we're getting an increasing number of people getting in touch with exactly those challenges of and not being sure what their entitlements are. To be really honest, we're in the process of upskilling ourselves in that as well. Like, it is complicated, and it does seem that you need to find the right people to reach out to in your particular local authority, and there's a lot of variation across schools and local authorities. So at the risk of sounding like I'm copping out on the question, we are in a process of kind of compiling all of our knowledge about that to respond to this very question. So I'd encourage you to visit our website, because we'll be putting our responses to that on the welcome page of our website. I don't know if Max or Wendy would have anything to add to that.
It's a familiar difficulty we've had for a lot of in Lambeth and South London. We have a lot of kids arriving in the country with special needs and no school place, and it's difficult to get them immediately into a special school. So a lot of the advice that's been given in the comments is actually, it's not all the same advice, but actually not all of it's fairly reasonable. So I would say contact your local, find out a contact for your local special educational needs local authority department, see if they can help. You may need to apply for a mainstream place for this child, and then have the mainstream school say, oh no, we can't meet their needs, and then say, well, then we need to speak to the SEN department, which is a pointlessly roundabout way of running these things, but that's sometimes what you have to do. It's something that we've tried to work on for 12 years in Lambeth, and we haven't got it right. So it's probably not going to be right in lots of places, and it is very variable from place to place. That's what I would say. It may be that doors start to open, but it is just keeping all of those different options, just calling people and see if you can get just get a door to start to open slightly for these kids, because it's not easy.
Really helpful. Lots of people recognizing this situation of online learning, and I think, Wendy, your advice that we can kind of calm down a little bit. It's, you know, our overall or aim might be to try and work at integration, but just living here, getting used to the culture here, we don't have to panic and speed it up. It can happen at the pace that's appropriate for the child. That's so helpful. Let's look at another case study, and then we'll have a look at some more questions. This is a real one from a family not too far away from us. A host family took their newly arrived Ukrainian guests out to buy some essential clothes from a large clothes store in the city. On the walk from the car park to their clothing store, a Chinook helicopter flew overhead, and the 9-year-old became very distressed. The host didn't know what to say or do. What advice would you give? I wonder if we start with you, Wendy. This feels like a traumatic episode.
Yeah.
What should the host do?
First thing is put it in the past. So identify whatever the child is feeling as, are you remembering something? Or that feels just like, you know, so that you're putting the past event in the past. And when I heard the helicopter, it felt just like when I've heard the helicopters before. That'd be the first thing. Actually, even before that, I'd say cut the shopping, go home, do it another day. If they don't, you know, if they've been triggered, they've been activated, get them someplace that's familiar and safe, and try again another day.
That's really helpful. My wife and I, we were in Albania when the Kosovo crisis kicked off, and then when there was a crisis in Albania and there was lots of machine gun fire, and we came back to the UK, and it was things like even shopping trolleys all clashing together suddenly. Like and I didn't think I'd been affected by it until I was back here, and suddenly I'm hearing things.
Absolutely.
Max, help us understand from a kind of pediatric point of view, if these things are occurring, what kind of help should we be trying to find the child? Should we be trying to find help? What do we do if we can't find help? Help us understand what to do next.
Well, I mean, I think that's Wendy would probably agree, but please say if not. But if a child is being activated, you know, having traumatic activations on maybe one we would say, okay, well, let's just leave it for a bit. But if they're having regular traumatic activations, you probably do need to start to think about, you know, start to get referrals in for some kind of mental health support. Difficulty is, you know, that takes an awful long time, and our child mental health services in the NHS are absolutely on their knees at the moment. So the question really is what you do in the meantime, and again, places of safety, safe space is a really important point. I suppose the only thing I would add is, even if you feel like you don't know what you're doing, actually looking like you do know what you're doing, and you are in control and you are calm, and okay, just going to go home now, trying to keep your own anxiety levels under control, so you're not reflecting anxiety back to the child and making them feel like the adults are not in control, the adults don't know what they're doing. Actually, a lot of us in our professional lives spend a lot of our time pretending we know what we're doing, and that's just a skill to
take it to the
cultivate.
That's really helpful.
Just building off what Max just said, grounding at that time, you know, reminding, you know, what do you see around you? What's going on now? Where are you at this moment? That kind of thing. Something we do, we call it the name game, where we just say, look around and tell me what you see. You know, I see a door, I see a car, I see a tree, I see a bird, until it calms down. The other thing I would say, just as a resource, any book written by Peter Levine would be very helpful if you're wanting to understand better. Anything by Peter Levine would be helpful.
Brilliant. Max, just on accessing those services, as you say, sometimes local authority, you know, the CAMS service, great, very responsive. Sometimes they're already overwhelmed and there's a backlog. What do we do? I called CAMS.
You have to make the assumption that your local CAMS is overwhelmed, because I don't know of one that's not locally. So, I mean, obviously, one of the things I said is to plug plug these families into local health services. So once they've got a GP, then you have the ability then to refer to more specialist services, but don't have the expectation that there's going to be a rapid response to the distress, because I don't know that. I mean, I think there may be some. The other guys might know some sort of charitable resources that might be helpful, but in terms of NHS resources, there's no kind of there's nothing earmarked for this group.
Okay, thank you. Just on the triggering, like I'm imagining that a lot of us, we care about Ukraine. That's why we're involved in this. So we might have the news on, we might have other things on in the background. You know, it's on the front page of the newspaper. How do we handle that? I'm nervous about, you know, wrapping people in cotton wool, but again, this must be a very difficult thing for families to be seeing all the time. Do you have guidance, Wendy, how to avoid re-triggering people?
Yeah, I think, you know, Max talked about having your own space and them having their own space. If you want to watch the news, do it in your own space. I don't think I would introduce that. It's not necessary. It may or may not trigger somebody. I wouldn't even take the risk.
Really helpful. We had that on the course, actually, that let's say your teenage son is into Call of Duty, it's a first-person shooter. Again, you probably don't want that on your main television set. If they're going to do that, let's do that in a separate room with the door closed. It might not trigger someone, but as you say, why take the risk, and let people do, you know, give them some choice about what they're being exposed to. Let's push on with a couple more case studies, and then we'll take some more questions from the chat. This is a teaching context. A year group leader was asked to address a year group to explain that a Ukrainian child was coming to join the school on Monday. She was very aware that there were 2 Russian children in the year group. How should she best prepare the children to welcome him, recognizing that could be a complicated context? Emily, do you have any wisdom for us?
I think my initial response to that is almost why are they being asked to address the whole year group? I kind of imagine that schools have processes, or most schools would have a process for welcoming new children, and that they would do that on a regular basis. And something sort of feels a little bit off with me in that they're being asked to treat this student differently. And I think labeling them from the outset as a refugee from Ukraine is really quite challenging, particularly thinking about Ukrainians I've spoken to for whom, like, even just a few months ago, this situation was unimaginable, and to suddenly be being referred to as refugees is just really hard. So I think I would probably take more of the approach of what would the school normally do to welcome any child, but then within that, making sure that those who need to know do know, so that teachers, for example, are aware of the trauma that this student will have experienced and what they can do, all the things that Max and Wendy have talked about in terms of how they can support that child. And then as they get to know the child, see what forms of welcome would be particularly appropriate, whether that's matching them up with a couple of people to sort of be their buddies, or kind of special support within the school, perhaps really demonstrating that the school is welcoming to Ukrainians, but also not to the detriment of those Russian students who are also just children learning in the school. So yeah, those would be my reflections on that.
So helpful, Emily. That stigmatization piece is something, again, it's well intentioned, that we want to make sure that we're a really welcoming community, but it immediately kind of makes them a kind of mini celebrity, and that's probably not what they need in order to just adapt to normal life. As a foster carer, I know that many foster children hate to be labelled. That's why they don't want the social worker to come and visit them at school, because it makes them different. So again, well intentioned. Maybe you do something about hospitality in general rather than, you know, pigeonholing some specific people. That's really wise advice. Anything from you, Max or Wendy, on that one?
Just low key. Just make it low key. I would. They're just kids. You know what I mean? Just a new kid, and that's hard. Even if you're moving from Shrewsbury, you know, to take a random example.
Good. Yeah. Other cities are available. Shrewsbury,
other cities are available. Shrewsbury is a nice place.
Excellent. Good. Wendy, anything from you?
No, I would just agree with what both Max and Emily had said.
Brilliant. Last case study, and then we'll hit some questions. So get them going in the chat. A family staying in the UK get the call that a family member they lived with back in the Ukraine has died. How can the host family support the children, their age between 4 and 14, with this loss? What signs would they need to look for that would mean they should visit the GP, for example? Max or Wendy, anything?
Yeah. I would just start with it's grief like it's grief for anybody. It may be quite triggering and they may, have a bit of post-traumatic stress coming out of that. All the things we've already said, give them space, quiet, let them do the lead, let them take the lead, let the parents take the lead. My first response is be scarce, let the family grieve.
I happened to read something about this recently, and it may be that the family, in this hypothetical situation, the family have different cultural kind of observances, but there are some quite powerful cultural things around death and grief, and there is a Ukrainian tradition of particular observances in the 3rd, 9th and 40th day after death. So it's worth thinking, do you have any particular things that you do generally when somebody who's important to you dies? And if they say no, not particularly, that's fine. But if this is something that's important in their community, then if they're comfortable with that, trying to kind of allow them to do this could be helpful. In terms of the question about when you should go to the GP, you should just generally speaking, I'm a little bit wary of the pathologization of grief. Grief is a process that needs to be worked through. If somebody is really stuck and it's causing them a lot of problems, they can't go to school, they can't function, then you should maybe think about it. But there isn't. I'm not even particularly a big fan of cutoff, month cutoffs. Clearly, that if they're very close to the person, there may be some impairment to start with, but it's impossible to give actual kind of cutoffs on that. And I know people try, but I'm not sure that the science is really supports it. It is to do with how well they're functioning. But letting grief happen is really important. We do too much tamping it down and don't worry, move on. It's a process that needs to be completed as far as it can ever be completed.
That's really helpful.
I would just say I really agree with what Max just said. And just as a reference point, in general, grief counseling wouldn't happen until about 6 months after someone has passed.
Okay, so that's a good rule of thumb. Thank you.
Excellent. I was involved in a tragic situation where a little girl died over a Christmas period, and her older brother in the school was having a lot of difficulties. Things were kind of really working out in the classroom. And there was an actual grief service that was provided by a charity that worked in concert with the school and the parent to kind of find a good way forward. So I guess as a host, that's something you could research to find out what resources are available and make sure that you're working in concert with the parents, the school, and if there is a third party available, because as you say, it's going to work out differently for different people. But just your job can be resource finder. What's out there, what's the help that we can find. Of course, culture and language are going to be interesting challenges, but let's see, a lot of these things will be transferable and translatable. Brilliant. Well, we're hearing some really helpful comments in the chat. Thank you, everybody. Lots of questions about visa process, and I understand how frustrating that has been. My big statement is, that the government is doing something pretty unusual, that we had a system that was designed to keep as many people out as possible, and we're gradually turning it around to let in as many people as quickly as possible. And we're hearing 5 to 6 weeks is people are waiting, and it is incredibly tough for you. It's even worse for the families that you're trying to support. But I guess Wendy's wisdom here about being the calm presence, that's therapeutically useful in any interaction that you have with the family. You be the calm presence, help them, don't add more stress or grief to their situation. But yeah, it's great that you're passionate, so well done. I guess a few questions related to getting school places and language. I think we've covered most of those. I guess maybe this is a good one for Emily, just quickly. As we get closer to the end of term, we're in May now, there's only a few weeks left before we hit the summer holidays. Is there any wisdom about, is it going to be worth even starting, or should they wait until September? Do you have any guidance if children are arriving in this period?
I think it's probably quite challenging and dependent on the situation of the family or the child. I think, as Wendy said, sometimes just that that space can be helpful. I think it's probably not too late to start even looking at what's out there. It might not be that a child would get a school place this term, but taking the opportunity of school term still running to visit some schools, for example, or just to start seeing what's out there. So yeah, I would encourage you to sort of still try and connect with local schools if you can to get the ball rolling. But I think also there are a lot of resources out there as well as kind of interim measures. So things that people can do to be learning English or to be meeting people socially. So I think also to explore other things is quite common for people arriving as refugees from all sorts of different countries to have this delay. It's really common, and there's a lot of good practice in how to also support people during that time.
That's great. Brilliant. Quick question for Wendy. Someone was asking about the therapeutic value of play. What are sort of things that hosts could be doing to help children, get over some of the things they're facing? Some questions about use of nature and green and blue spaces. Any wisdom there?
Great question. Absolutely. Again, it's gonna, each child will connect with something differently. So for one child, it might be more art. And so having resources there, tactical kind of stuff, Play-Doh, paint, crayons, markers, lots of colors, allowing them to express, not necessarily prompting them what to do, but just allowing them to express what they want to express. Also, physical play. If they've got this, fight instinct in them, they've got to release that's got to come out somehow. And so anything active, running, some sort of playing with a ball, climbing, good and exhausted. And then the other would be vocal as well, singing, screaming outside. I've had clients where, we've gone to the charity store and bought a bunch of plates and thrown them and broken them, anything to release, some of that fight in them to help their bodies come back down. So yeah, play is great.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Wendy. Right, we're coming towards the end of our time together. I've just got a quick 9 bullet points for you, some takeaways from some of the things that our guests have said, but some of the wisdom that's on the Sanctuary course. We're hearing work with rather than work for. Let's give people back agency to make their own decisions. So give people choices. 2, show dignity rather than pity. We've got to get that balance right. We have a power relationship that we need to be careful of. So let's do things that are going to encourage dignity rather than pity. Use names rather than labels. We heard that from don't draw attention to the refugee child in your school. Talk about little Sasha that's just arrived, and again, don't make a spectacle out of them. Focus on successes rather than struggles. That's interesting. Encourage play rather than work. Oversee rather than overwhelm. Embrace difference rather than expect uniformity. We heard that about grief, didn't we? We're all free to grieve in our own way, so let's adapt to how people want to grieve. Number 8, maximize professional involvement rather than avoid it. Okay, we know that there is challenge in the system, but still let's get people access as quickly as we can to the help that they need. And because there might be a long waiting list, maybe do that earlier rather than later. And number 9, go far rather than go fast. Think marathon rather than sprint. We're recognizing that it's going to take a long time for people to feel comfortable here. So things like whether they're online learning or in school learning, we can play the long game and allow people to make the decisions in their own time. So I hope that's a little helpful summary. 3 quick things that you might want to do in order to kind of step forward further. Some of you are volunteers, some of you are frustrated hosts. You've not been able to have the families with you as quickly as you can. Well, let me give you 3 quick ideas. So one is volunteer. Here at Sanctuary, we are absolutely dependent on volunteers. Someone is helping me, for example, send out the emails that some of you received to get an invitation here. That's a volunteer doing that. I've got people doing some number crunching for me. So if you have a skill that you think you might want to make available so you can help the national picture here, just get in touch with us at hello@sanctuaryfoundation.org.uk. You might be able to connect me with people that can help. So today's event, you can see we brought experts together, or maybe there's another expert that we should have been speaking to as well to add another dimension. Can you connect us? We're really particularly looking for connections with businesses who might be able to help us with supplying goods to newly arrived families. We've got a referral system so we can get safe bedding, safe clothing, pushchairs, prams, and those kind of materials. We're really after some business contacts there. And maybe you found this session helpful. Well, all of our speakers gave their time voluntarily, but Sanctuary needs some finance to be able to run these kind of things regularly. Just even using the platform that we're using today costs some money. So you may want to make a little contribution, and you could do so by getting your phone out and taking a picture of that QR code, or even just using that QR code. It will take you somewhere where you can make a donation. And please, the last thing we want to say to everybody here is well done and thank you. Thank you to you who came and gave up time to be part of this event today. We're grateful for you. I love the way you're all cheering each other on in chat and giving advice. That's brilliant. There is one national team, and we're it, trying to do our best to help Ukrainian refugees. I want to say a huge thank you to Max Davey. He's in the middle of a crazy busy day in his day job, just helping vulnerable children in Lambeth, and he gave us time. We're so grateful for him. Thank you for Wendy joining us all the way from the US. Thanks for making time to help us here in the UK. Emily and the work that Refugee Education UK do is fabulous, and we're so grateful for them. I want to say a little thank you also to Gareth, who helped me run this event. I only told him last night. We only had 150 people registered at the weekend. I thought, oh, we'll be able to do it on Zoom. And then 1,000 people registered, so we've done it on this platform. And if you want to do an online event, Gareth is your man. And there you go, Top Dog Promotions. This is his day job, and he might be able to help you too. So thank you, everybody. Really grateful for you being part of today. Don't forget, do the Sanctuary course and spread it widely. It's useful for anybody who is interested in standing alongside refugees and their families as they come to the UK. Together, we really are making a difference for some really vulnerable people, and they are so grateful, and I'm grateful too. So have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.